Welcome back to the book club. Today's book review is going to be for the book The Butcher's Masquerade by Matt Dinniman. This is the fifth book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series, and this is going to be a spoiler free review. I'm going to be talking about what my rating out of 10 is for the plot, the people, and the pacing of the book. And I might make some references to some characters, and if you consider the fact that characters are still alive a spoiler, you may want to wait until you're on book 5 in the series before watching, but I'm going to try to keep things very vague, very high level, and just talk overall about what I thought about this book. This is the fifth book in the series, so I have book reviews on the other four already. If you haven't picked up this series yet, I highly recommend it. It is definitely one of my favorite series. I believe there is only 6 books out so far, and I think there's 10 planned. I plan on reading the 6th book fairly soon because I enjoyed the 5th so much, but let's get right into the review. The first category that I'm reviewing is the plot, and I rate the plot a 10 out of 10. The plot, I noticed that Matt did something that seemed a little different to me from the previous Dungeon Crawler Carl books, where there's a lot of non-sequential storytelling going on. In previous entries, there wasn't that much flashbacks to things that happened earlier within the book. There's some flashbacks at like what happened with Carl outside of, before he got trapped in the dungeon, for example, but there wasn't a lot of flashbacks about things that actually happened within the book. So, something that happens early on is there's a conversation Carl has that gets cut short, and we just sort of move on, flash forward 6 hours, and continue the plot along. And throughout the book, we flash back to parts of that conversation that are relevant. And this goes into the whole, Carl is sort of this meticulous planner who is trying to strategize, and his plans don't always end up working out, and he has to change them at the last minute often. But he does try to do these like intricate, detailed plans to make sure that he can survive or his friends can survive. And so that's something that happens in this book. And I think that it really helps pull the plot forward because we know that like each element of the plot sort of ties into this initial conversation that he has, where he's trying to glean some information from outside people about what's going on in the dungeon and make his plans around that. So I think that it really helps enhance the plot and sort of bring it to the next level. It's more than just going from boss battle to boss battle, going from, town to town and, beating people up and trying to find some way to like cheat his way to the next floor or survive long enough to get down to the next floor and all of that stuff. I think in particular, this like flashback writing style adds a couple things to the mix. It gives the readers a better opportunity to guess at how things will actually affect the plot. I think something that happens in this book a lot is Carl has this massive toolkit of spells and items and all this stuff that he's constantly getting. It's raining loot in the world of Dungeon Crawler Carl. So it's hard to keep track of what he has access to and how he might actually get his way out of these situations. But I think that knowing that it was something that was planned in advance helps the reader maybe predict what's going to happen, or at least it gives us some sort of like grounding to predict based off of. One example that is not, I don't think it's a spoiler, it happens pretty early on, and it's just the name of a spell, but there's a spell called Zerzura or something like that. I don't know. It starts with a Z. And he talks about it early on, but it's not described at all what it is. It's just mentioned as this powerful spell that, people don't want you to have, or, it's every time it's used, it causes some sort of drama. And we don't actually know what the spell is until the very end of the book or towards the end of the book. Which is why I don't think it's much of a spoiler to just say the name of the spell. But anyways, the whole idea is that like throughout the entire book, you're thinking like, oh, is the spell going to come into play here? Is it going to come into play here? What's he planning on with the spell? How is he going to use it? And I think it's really interesting to just give the readers this like grounding idea to sort of hypothesize around. And there's more than just that one spell. There's a bunch of things that happen in the beginning that we can sort of think about for the rest of the book and try to figure out how it's going to come into play. The other thing is, I don't exactly know how Matt writes. I know that some people are, meticulous outliners where the entire story is written in an outline and then they just sort of expand that outline and that's the book effectively. Other people write on the seat of their pants. And if he does write that way, then this sort of flashback architecture of the book, I think, is really useful for him because it's not necessarily like, you can vaguely foreshadow things and then just make up how they fit into the plot later. And it's possible that that's what he did here, but I think it worked out really well. So if he writes in that way and he sort of just set himself up to be creative with what the flashback actually was as he continued writing and just sort of made the flashback to fit his narrative. I think that's smart and it works out really well. If he planned what was going to happen in the book ahead of time and then just sort of planted this flashback as this bit of foreshadowing, that's also really nice. So either way, I think both of those, reasons help really push the plot to the next level, and it's why I give it a 10 out of 10. Also, again, the ending of this book, Matt absolutely nailed it. The titular Butcher's Masquerade is an event that happens throughout this book, and it was very fun and exciting. The ending was everything that I would expect an ending like this book to be. There's a bit of a cliffhanger about what's going to happen next. There's a lot of fun. There's a lot of drama. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of tragedy. And then all of a sudden, like, you're just sort of begging for the next book. For the next category, I'm going to talk about the people. I rate the people in this book a 9 out of 10. So there was a lot of very emotional character moments in this book, which has been happening gradually over time. So at the very beginning, there's not really that much emotion. It's more just like trying to survive, and the characters have these like funny interactions. But as the book progresses, it gets more and more serious, and like the characters, not Carl and Donut have been together since the beginning, but there's other people they've met throughout the dungeon, and they start to realize that it's going to be harder and harder to keep everybody alive and keep everybody around forever. So there's more, high stakes conversations and dialogue between the characters that I think is really interesting. The dialogue sort of fluctuates between funny and serious. And I think that there's a pretty healthy balance between the two. It's still like 90% goofs and gaffs and like funny, interesting character moments. And the AI descriptions and the goddamn it donut moments are still there. But there's also an increase in these like serious emotional conversations. Carl keeps alluding to like this river that he hears rushing in the back of his mind. And like it's sort of all these, the trauma of all the things that have happened so far is culminating. And it's clearly starting to have an effect on the various characters throughout the book because they've, survived pretty long so far. And they have seen a lot of death and destruction. And they're starting to, reckon with those emotions. The only reason why I don't give this a 10 out of 10 is just because there's now so many side characters. They sort of pick up a couple extra people, sometimes more than a couple every book. And there's now so many side characters that in the moments where Carl is planning what to do next, he sends a lot of like DMs to random people to sort of say, oh, hey, you do this and you do this and you do this, and then we'll all meet up here. But there's so many of those people that it's starting to become hard for me to remember who is who. And it takes me a second to realize like which book were they in and what did they do before and what's their relationship to like the crew. So I don't know if this is just going to keep getting like a little bit worse over time, or if people are just going to start to get killed off and like the number of people are going to be eliminated. But that is the one reason why I think the people is not quite a 10 out of 10. It's just there's a lot of secondary characters that are mentioned maybe once every 200-300 pages, and then you never hear about them again. And they maybe had their moment to shine in an earlier book, but it's hard to realize what they're around for. Remember what they sort of are doing in the current book. And lastly, I want to talk about the pacing. So for the pacing, I rated a 10 out of 10. Yet again, I feel like the pacing of this book was perfect. I also rated book 4 a 10 out of 10 for pacing. I think that Matt has really perfected the sort of ebb and flow of these crazy, chaotic battles with the character development, more slow plotting and planning and sort of moving between locations while the characters are just chatting about all the crazy things that are happening. That's really been perfected now. And I'm expecting that in the future for the series in book 6 and beyond, he's just going to keep getting better at it. I think that book 3 was definitely a bit of a slump just because of the confusing dungeon layout and the way that they had to spend so much time planning what was going on. I think that it's unlikely that Matt's going to make a dungeon like that again, where there's so much description necessary to figure out what's happening. So I'm confident that the pacing going forward is going to continue to be good. And I thought the pacing for this book was awesome. For the last section, I'm going to talk about, will I continue reading this series? I think it should be obvious by now. Book 5, there's presumably 5 more books to go, I believe. And I'm definitely going to keep reading. I think it would take a lot for me to suddenly stop reading this series. I think there'd have to be like 2 consistent duds in a row in a series that so far has had 0 duds. So It's extremely unlikely that I'm going to stop reading the series before it's done. I guess, with book six, the book six review that'll probably come out in like a month or two. Once I get around to reading it, we'll see if that keeps up the excitement. But I'm expecting that I'll see this series through to the end. And that's all for this video. Let me know if you've been enjoying the series so far. Let me know if you haven't even read the series so far, but you've watched this video for some reason. I'll talk to you next time.